Climate change refers to the variation of Earth's global or regional climate over a long period of time, whether due to natural variability as normal changes or it is the result of human-induced activities. IPCC 2007d. 30. By the impact of climate change as systems become more vulnerable to natural hazards, there is a greater need to develop responses that are able to counter potential future disasters. Such a response is known as adaptation to climate change. IPCC 2001b. Smit et al. 1999. Community Forest User Group is main areas to act climate change adaptation in Nepal. Nepal's National Adaptation Programme of Action. In 2010, the government of Nepal approved National Adaptation Programme of Action, NAPA, developed as a requirement under the UNFCCC to access funding for the most urgent and immediate adaptation needs from the least developed countries fund. In Nepal, NAPA developed with the three components: preparation and dissemination of NAPA document, development and maintenance of Nepal Climate Change Knowledge Management Center, and development of multi-stakeholder climate change initiative coordination committee in the NAPA of Nepal. 9 integrated projects have been identified as the urgent and immediate national adaptation priority. They are promoting community-based adaptation through integrated management of agriculture, water, forest and biodiversity sector, building and enhancing adaptive capacity of vulnerable communities through improved system and access to services related to agriculture, development, community-based disaster management for facilitating climate adaptation, GLOF monitoring and disaster risk reduction, and forest and ecosystem management for supporting climate-led adaptation innovations, adapting to climate challenges in public health and ecosystem management for climate adaptation, empowering vulnerable communities through sustainable management of water resource and clean energy support, and promoting climate-smart urban settlement. NAPA's implementation framework envisages that the operating costs will be kept to a minimum and at least 80% of the available financial resources will reach the local level to fund activities on the ground. Stakeholders in Nepal has also started discussing national adaptation plans, which is medium and long-term adaptation plan for country as decided by UNFCCC. Effective climate change in Nepal. The effects of greenhouse gases on both drought and flooding events have been found, including severe winter drought and excessive monsoon flooding. CC has been alarming in the world by global warming, which caused by increasing concentration of greenhouse gases, physical impacts of climate change and deforestation. In Nepal, 95% of GHGs are emissions from agriculture and forestry sectors, where 77% from forestry sector only. The consequences of global warming have seen globally to specifically in developing and intermountainous countries like Nepal has high intensity rainfall during rainy season. It resulted heavy floods, landslides and soil erosion. It also common to find drought in many parts of Nepal that comes out the impacts of climate change are evidences on sectors like forests, water resources, agriculture, human health and biodiversity in Nepal. Likewise, altogether 14 glacial lake outburst floods have happened between 1935 and 1991 in Nepal. In total, 21 GLOFs have been identified as being potentially dangerous at present. In this way, CC and livelihoods integral part and have vice versa relationship. The low-income in subsistence users are about 38% of total population. population Nepal lies below the poverty line have hard time to afford for their livelihoods in Nepal. That is a great challenge to cope with climate change-induced hazard and extreme events. The livelihoods of more than 80% local people of hilly region are heavily depending on climate-sensitive areas such as agriculture, forest and livestock, and on other natural resources such as water and irrigation. Potentiality of climate change adaptation. Response to climate change in Nepal has been growing in recent years with an effort to cope with the changing situation and build resilience capacity into adaptation to climate change. In climate-induced vulnerability context, Nepal developed policy-level provision regarding to adaptation policy called National Adaptation Programme of Action to Climate Change. The NAPA document opened the door to adaptation activities into country. Under the provision of national-level policy, Local Adaptation Plan of Action national framework devised out by government, it only mentioned the provision of the implementation mechanism at district or village development committee level to act climate change adaptation. However, this document is still silent to provision of implementation mechanism at community level, though there are still silent to act adaptation implementation mechanism at community level. Some community-level adaptive strategies are being implemented as community-based adaptation plan for poor and vulnerable communities and who have less capacity to cope with disaster and are more dependent on natural resources for their livelihoods, goods and services from community forest. After 3 decades of CF in Nepal, more than 1.652 million forest lands handed over to 1.45 million households of 17,685 community forest user group to conserve, manage and utilization. CFUG as a common property resource management program in Nepal have resulted in improving forest cover and condition. By institutionally, community forest user group is autonomous, independent and accountable institution for conserving, managing and utilizing of natural resources in Nepal, legitimized by Forest Act 1992 and Forest Regulation 1995 of Nepal. The additional advantages are as effective protection, wise use of resources, plantation, forest fire control, a more effective contribution to local development and economic generation. It enhanced biodiversity, water flow and soil stability. More than 90% of villages report that their forests are in better condition than a decade ago. Furthermore, CFs are able to meet poor and vulnerable households' daily subsistence needs for forest products such as firewood, fodder, and timbers. Apart from this, growing forests capture and store carbon that are contributing to both mitigation and adaptation to CC. Because of user groups have institutionally developed after CF handed over. Furthermore, the landscape of hills of Nepal drastically transformed into greenery. Such types of changes have positive impact on carbon sequestration, which has contributed in reducing effects of climate change. It is not only the CF contributing in climate change adaptation by providing goods and services. The CFUGs have also been used as local institutions for adaptation planning. Conclusion. Traditional top-down decision-making processes have become inadequate due to their inability to create appropriate solutions for local communities. Nepal's forest cover, condition and quality are being improved. This is the success of only through three-way partnerships such as communities from bottom-up function, government and donor from top-down function and NGOs, civil society network from outside in. In this situation, CFUGs have to be involved in mainstreaming to implement climate change adaptation. It is due to their playing the key role in proactive in investing the funds. climate change knowledge transfer and policy feedback to adapt to the impact of climate change. Policy shall be emphasized the establishing groups around the resources that are indispensable for the livelihoods of poor and vulnerable groups to access diversification opportunity. It is necessary to bridge this gap. Bottom-up approaches may produce the best results by building on local experiences and knowledge. For this, building up the capacity of groups and the poor and vulnerable communities on climate change mitigation and adaptation is pertinent. In addition to this, focus needs to be given on institutional development, capacity building and awarding CFUGs for the good work on forest development and biodiversity protection, which ultimately contributes to ecological and environment balance.